Thanks, everyone. Well, it's nearly the end of the day, so we appreciate you sticking around to listen to this fireside chat. I think it actually works really well because we were just talking about this before we got on stage. But for those of you that were here this morning, we had Will Arbuckle from NTIA talking about BABA, amongst other things. And this is going to bookend the day nicely in getting your perspective on all that and all the work that you guys have been doing to be compliant and share your experience and your advice with everyone. But before we get to that, just an opportunity for you guys to introduce yourselves and AFL as well, just so we're all on the same page.
Yep, appreciate that. So I'm Will Miller. I'm the program manager for our rural broadband strategy at AFL. So that encompasses everything from our go-to-market strategy, products, and the like. So BABA compliance is obviously a big part of that.
And I'm Josh Seimer, and I'm our market manager, so I do strategy for telecoms and MSOs. So BEAD and BABA compliance are big themes with our strategy there as well.
Excellent. Well, welcome, gentlemen. Great to have you here. And we titled this session "Leveraging Vendor Relationships to Navigate BABA Compliance for BEAD," which is a huge topic. I don't know if we're going to get through that in the time allotted, but let me ask you broadly around, when it comes to procuring materials for BEAD, right, and everything that entails. What do the purchasers need to have top of mind? What are some of the key things that they need to think about first and foremost, and then perhaps as the next couple of steps after that?
Yeah, I'll kind of kick that off. So, I think it's very important for end users, for service providers to really partner with their vendors to understand and navigate that compliance landscape. Hence the title of the session here today. Don't go it alone. So from a purchasing perspective, the big thing is, and questions that we've gotten in the past, folks are saying, hey, give me your BABA compliant products. What BABA compliant products you have? Well, it's a very nebulous question. So the biggest thing that we say is make sure you define what your funding program is, rather than just asking for a BABA compliant product set. The reason being, and Will talked about that this morning from NTIA, is there's a lot of waivers in place. So just saying strictly BABA is pretty restrictive. So there's other funding programs out there that may require BABA that don't have the same waivers as say a BEAD does. So be very prescriptive in the funding program that you're looking to acquire materials for, rather than just saying I need BABA.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we do have issues. Sometimes the rules do apply differently for different federal programs. Some of them, BABA doesn't even apply, but other rules might apply. And what we see happen a lot is someone knows where the funding is coming from, but the person who ends up calling and purchasing the product or requesting a quote doesn't. So they're not 100% sure what they're asking for. They just make a statement like, I need BABA, and we have to try to work on that to find out for sure what it is they need.
Mm-hmm.
And one other thing I forgot to note, so again, Will mentioned this morning as well, but there is the self-certification process that NTIA has initiated for the BEAD program specifically. So those suppliers that do self-certify, and Will did mention publishing that initial list next week. We'll hold them to that. But we just self-certified last week to kind of meet that deadline. So if you're working with a vendor partner, it's important to ask them what products have you self-certified. So making sure that you get that list, but for AFL as an example, you can go to our website and get a full list. It's a very full list. We make a lot of stuff, but you can navigate that and then determine what individual part numbers for those product families that you need and request.
Mm-hmm. And are you seeing less questions around that? Are people getting their head around it? Or is there still, when you see folks looking at some of your products and they're wondering about compliance or not, is that coming through? Is that clear with your clients?
A little bit. I could say that, and from my experience, the requests that I've seen come through so far, some are a little bit more educated in the rules and the particulars, including the waiver, than others. So I would encourage service providers, if you're looking at going after BEAD funding, Reading the entire BEAD NOFO is quite a task. I mean, obviously, if you're bidding, you should probably be well aware of the NOFO, but the BEAD waiver specifically, it's something even I can read. It's only 19 pages, so it's a quick read. So being very familiar with that waiver it provides a lot of information and makes the rules, I don't want to say crystal clear. I'm chatting with other vendors just these past 2 days about the way they interpret certain things. But it gives a lot of information there. Josh, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, it's important for customers who are purchasing things to know what's your funding source. Our goal is to make things easy for our customers. We worry about the details of the requirements, like 55% content of this and certain manufacturing steps done in the US, but others don't have to be. Let that be our problem. But in order to help you, we need to know things like what the funding source is. And you need to understand whether BABA applies. It doesn't apply to everything, even in the programs where the BABA rule covers it. It applies to infrastructure. So a fiber optic cable is infrastructure. You install it, it stays there.
Yeah.
A splice machine, for example, it's not infrastructure. You use it, you take it with you. A truck is not infrastructure, but an enclosure that you leave in the ground is. So that's important to know. And then making sure that the vendor provides what you need. When you get a quote, you need to know that the items you're getting quoted are definitely BABA compliant or compliant to the applicable waiver. In this case, we're mostly talking about the BEAD waiver. And then when you purchase it, you need to get a certification document with that order. And again, if you do those things, make sure of those things, you help us make it our problem to sort out all the details to make sure that item is compliant for what you need it to be compliant to.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So you mentioned the waiver there, the waivers, and easier to read and get your head around it. So one would think that solves it then, right? So everything is fine and we've got the waivers and we're good to go. I'm sure that's not the case, but would love to hear your thoughts.
Yep. So we'll talk primarily about the BEAD waiver, but the waiver process is a way for different agencies, in this case we're talking primarily about the NTIA, to say we need to modify the rules, we need to clarify some definitions. It does not eliminate the need to follow those rules, but it does make some changes. So for example, with the BEAD waiver, passive optical components like splitter chips are now exempted from the requirements. In other areas, it's just a clarification of definitions, and in others, there's other modifications made. So again, primarily, we go back to two key points. Make it the manufacturer's problem as much as possible, but you need to let us know what the program is. Because if we say this is compliant to the BEAD waiver, you can use it, but then it turns out you're actually working on a Department of Transportation funded program, then you're not getting the right stuff. There's also a de minimis thing, which is also commonly misunderstood in that waiver.
Yeah, the de minimis portion of it is sometimes incorrectly interpreted as a catch-all bucket. So I've got this catch-all bucket and I can just stuff a bunch of stuff under the rug and I don't care where it's sourced from, but that's not necessarily the case. It's not the case at all, really, but the BEAD waiver, and this is why it's important to actually read it, again, lean on the vendor partners to help, but you need to understand there is this de minimis bucket that as a vendor we won't track because we don't know the total cost of your project. So the de minimis waiver actually calls that you have this bucket and it can be 5% of the total project cost or $1 million, whichever is less. But the waiver actually calls out specific items that can fall into that bucket and some things that can't. For instance, so they actually call out in the waiver other network equipment. They give some examples of what that entails. But they're very prescriptive in a few things. Optical fiber and cable cannot fall into the de minimis bucket. So don't go source a bunch of cable from China and say, I'm going to go stuff it in this bucket. Right. I'm using the word bucket a lot, but that's kind of what it is. And another important thing of the de minimis waiver too is you can fill that up relatively quickly. So that's another thing is you want things that either fall into some other components of the waiver or items that are just straight BABA compliant, no waiver needed. And that way I don't have to be relying on that de minimis bucket. I'm gonna say it again. All right, I'm done.
It's all right. We'll keep track of the number.
Need a counter back
We'll
here.
check in. So, I mean, and this is the beauty of sitting here and knowing way less than you guys. I get to ask dumb questions like this, but then why not just be BABA compliant and not bother about the waiver, right? I mean, if that's the complexity we're talking about, what's keeping you guys and others going through this process from just being BABA compliant and leaving it there?
Yep. So that is something that on the surface makes sense, and we have seen that from a few of our customers, as they say, it's complicated to figure out where this funding is coming from and which waivers apply to which pot of funding that I'm drawing from. Certainly with larger customers as well, they may have a project over here that's funded by ARPA. They may have a project over here that's part of the middle mile program. They may have a project over here then that's BEAD funded. And they say, I just want to use one set of products for all of them. So tell their purchasers, go out and source BABA compliant products. And again, on the surface, it makes sense, simplifies the supply chain. The problem is, there's a reason these waivers exist. They exist for two reasons. Either there simply isn't enough US-based supply of a particular item, or US-based supply is cost prohibitive, or usually both. So for example, splitter chips and certain semiconductors, there simply isn't US-based production capable of keeping up with the demand for BEAD. So the NTI looked at that and said, we cannot achieve the goals of this program if we apply the unmodified BABA rules. We need a waiver to achieve the goals of BEAD. So for a customer then who's going to say, well, I just want to apply the unmodified BABA rules, the implication is you're not going to be able to achieve your construction goals under this program or whatever program you're part of if you apply those unmodified rules.
Yeah, because the spirit of BABA is great, right? We want to build U.S. or bring on some more U.S. manufacturing and jobs. But the reality is, yeah, there's a cost implication, there's a timeline implication. I mean, some of this capability, like Josh mentioned a few times, splitters. I mean, that's a pretty specialized process, and bringing that stateside would be very timely and very costly. So, yeah, that's one piece of it that unfortunately, we are relying on the waiver in some cases, but for the most part, I mean, we're trying to make everything as much as possible BABA compliant, but again, it's relying on what that funding source is and leaning on your vendor. So AFL is an example. I mean, I'm using now, I'm going to repeat another word, prescriptive. So we're very prescriptive in what we define these product sets as. So are these product sets truly BABA? Meaning they meet the BABA rule as it stands alone, don't even look at the waiver? Or is it actually compliant to the waiver requirements as it stands separately? So we're actually treating those two product sets very separately, and we're calling them out separately, both in how we define them on our self-certification, on the spec sheets, you name it. So that way you can kind of understand, again, if it's needs to go into de minimis. Well, you don't need to, because it's actually BABA, check mark. So again, being very deliberate in how we define those products is important. It makes it very clear for our customers. And I know some other vendors are taking the same stance.
Yeah. But I will say it's, like Will said, there's going to be a lot of products that are compliant to the BEAD waiver, but not to BABA in general. And again, that's why it's important to know the funding source, because there certainly are going to be a lot that fall into that bucket. There's going to be a smaller number that might be compliant to the BEAD waiver, might not be compliant to the middle mile waiver. We're going to do our best to focus on the really big funding sources and make sure our catalogs or spec sheets, et cetera, are very clear to say, this is BABA compliant, this is compliant to the BEAD waiver, but we can't cover every possible federal program. So especially if it's something other than BEAD, we need to know what it is, then we can look and come back and tell you for sure, yes, this will work for your program.
So we've got a couple minutes, and I'll see if there's any questions, but I also wanted to ask, We've been very focused, of course, on BABA in this panel. Looking ahead, do you see other potential roadblocks? Anything else that we need to keep in mind as we move forward and in not only BEAD, but in those other funding mechanisms?
Yeah, there's still a few open questions. I mentioned interpretation of the rules, right? So talking to other vendors and how they're interpreting certain things. So there's an open kind of question right now. There's two sides of the certification process. So there's the self-certification that, again, NTIA will have their website. They'll link it back to our website that has the list. But when do you actually need a certification letter to provide to an end user so they can and when they get audited, show it to whoever's going to be the policing that with NTIA. But so right now we're looking at it from a sales order acknowledgement. So when you order it, we'll actually supply the acknowledgement. But right now it's kind of TBD because I know there's some states that are saying, hey, you need to prove compliance to BABA or the BEAD waiver at the time of your application. So in that case, is the self-certification website enough? We'll see because there's still a lot of room open to interpretation there.
The way the requirements are written, there is a written requirement to keep track of the quantity of compliant items that you purchased. So you purchased, a total of 83 closures. You got to show certification letters that show those 83, whether they're on a single purchase order or multiple ones, were in fact compliant. And again, our job as vendors is to make that easy as possible. But if you buy 40 in one purchase order and 43 in another, we'll provide you with 2 letters because we don't know you're going to order another 43.
I see, yeah.
But we will provide that letter that says you ordered 40 of this part number, that's compliant.
Well, I don't envy you guys. I think this is quite a labor-intensive process, and it looks like we're getting there and understanding it and getting to that compliance phase. We have about a minute left. I know everyone is eager to get to the reception and so forth, but I did want to check if there were any questions for our panelists today before we wrap up. All right, it looks like everyone's thinking about, oh, there we go, we do have a question.
I'd say I don't think we explained it that well.
Certainly not.
Sure, there's some loose ends we can address. Thank you, Lucia.
We can hear you.
Okay,
There we go.
there I am.
Oh, wake us up.
So this is a little bit of a convoluted question, but it sounds as if in-kind match might need to be BABA compliant. So let's say there's a scenario where you sold materials to one of your clients and it's been sitting as a backup in a warehouse somewhere for 3 years, and now they want to put it into the network. Is there any way to retroactively certify that something is BABA compliant?
Yeah, so Josh and I literally just had this conversation with another vendor not an hour ago. It's shades of gray, as much of this is, but it depends on the product and depends on the vendor. And there's some cases, from a vendor perspective, we actually do have lot controls to component levels. So case by case, we could potentially take a look at existing inventory and determine where those materials came from. Because for the most part, a lot of our products that we're defining as compliant are new part numbers. And what we did with those new part numbers is we really restricted the supply chain for certain components to meet the rules. Where some products, before we had those part number changes, could, in theory, potentially be sourced and could tick you over under that 55% requirement. So yeah, I'd say work with your vendors. It is possible, asterisk, case by case.
In some cases, certainly for us, in some cases we'll be able to look back. In a lot of cases, we just won't have the data to say 55% of the components by cost went into that by lot number for sure. And I definitely can't speak for other vendors and the capability of their ERP systems to look back like that.
For sure. That's actually more optimistic than I was expecting. So thanks.
So
Yeah,
there's definitely a chance.
So you're saying there's a chance.
Yep.
Excellent. All right, well, we're just about out of time, but thank you both so much for walking us through that. I've certainly, it's been an education, not just today, but talking to you guys in preparation, so really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
And yeah, thank you all for joining us. Join me in thanking our panelists today.